It seemed like just another ordinary day at the Grand Oaks Hotel, a place known for its refined atmosphere and carefully maintained sense of exclusivity. The lobby sparkled under the glow of crystal chandeliers, with marble floors that seemed to gleam underfoot, and well-dressed guests moved about in quiet conversations, their whispers blending into the soft background music. Everything about the Grand Oaks Hotel exuded wealth, luxury, and perhaps most notably, a strict unspoken rule: not everyone belonged here. That's when the Harris family walked in. At first glance, they were well-dressed, certainly appropriate for the setting, but something about them seemed to catch the attention of those who considered themselves regulars at the Grand Oaks. Mr. Harris, a tall man with a calm and steady gaze, held his wife's hand as they stepped into the lobby. Mrs. Harris, poised and graceful, held their daughter's hand as she looked around, taking in the grandeur of the place. Yet there was an air about them, something different from the usual clientele, and for some, that difference was enough to spark doubt. Behind the grand reception desk stood Tessa, a longtime employee of the hotel, known among the staff for her meticulous attention to detail and unyielding standards. Tessa had worked at the Grand Oaks for years and prided herself on maintaining its sense of exclusivity. She could tell with a glance who belonged and who didn't, or so she thought. When she saw the Harris family walk in, her eyes narrowed slightly. A barely noticeable frown tugged at the corners of her mouth. As she adjusted her blazer and forced a professional smile, her eyes told a different story. A story of judgment, a silent appraisal of the family before they even approached her desk. To Tessa, they didn't quite fit the image of her usual guests. She gave them the kind of look that wasn't outright hostile, but filled with a subtle dismissal. They were outsiders in her mind, people who she assumed couldn't possibly be here for any legitimate reason. In her experience, guests who came in looking like the Harrises usually needed directions or were merely curious tourists who got in over their heads. She prepared herself to handle them in the way she knew best: polite but cold, efficient but distant, all while making it clear that this place wasn't for just anyone. But Tessa didn't know the whole story. She didn't know why the Harrises had come, what had brought them to this grand hotel, or the purpose behind the confident way they now approached the desk. In that moment, as she straightened her posture and prepared to manage them, she had no idea that this seemingly ordinary day would end up being anything but. She had no idea that the assumptions she was making would unravel in ways she couldn't imagine, that this family would soon turn her world, and the hotel's, upside down. For Tessa, this was the beginning of a lesson she would never forget. As Mr. and Mrs. Harris approached the counter, Tessa barely bothered to lift her gaze. Her fingers tapped rhythmically on the keyboard, a slight twitch at the corner of her mouth betraying her irritation at this unexpected interruption. She let out a quiet, practiced sigh, the kind that conveyed both boredom and disapproval, before pasting on a smile that felt as insincere as it looked. Her eyes darted over the family, making subtle assessments as she took in their presence with a hint of skepticism. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice carrying a note of detachment. The question hung in the air, laced with a thinly veiled suggestion that perhaps they might be lost. The hotel's typical guests were refined, dignified, and above all, predictable in Tessa's mind. The Harrises seemed different, their warm smiles and eager expressions contrasting with the cool, polished air of the lobby. As they began to speak, Tessa held up a finger, stalling them. "Just a moment, please," she murmured, feigning concentration as she clicked through screens on her computer, though she was doing little more than buying time. When she finally looked up, her lips curled into a condescending smile, and with an arched brow, she added, "Are you sure you're in the right place?" The question landed heavily, its insinuation clear. The Harrises exchanged a brief glance, Mrs. Harris's eyes flickering with a mix of discomfort and resilience, while Mr. Harris maintained his composure, his jaw tightening ever so slightly. They weren't strangers to this kind of judgment. Disrespect in polite packaging was something they'd encountered before. But today was different. Today they had a reason to be here, and they weren't about to be turned away by a few carefully veiled barbs. Mrs. Harris, sensing the tension rising in her husband, gently squeezed his hand, a reminder to stay calm. She took a step forward, lifting her chin slightly as she met Tessa's gaze head-on. "Yes, we're exactly where we need to be," she replied firmly, her voice steady but carrying a quiet strength. Tessa's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she recovered, her gaze dropping back to the computer as she continued with the check-in process, albeit with a bit more reluctance. But the subtle dismissals didn't stop there. As she processed their reservation, Tessa spoke in clipped tones, her voice laced with impatience as she rattled off hotel policies and amenities, her tone making it clear she assumed they would neither understand nor appreciate the level of sophistication the hotel prided itself on. Each word seemed chosen to remind them of their perceived place, as though she were setting boundaries they shouldn't dare to cross. The Harrises, however, held their ground, refusing to let her dismissive attitude overshadow their purpose. They responded with polite, unwavering determination, making it clear that they had every right to be there. Tessa, though, couldn't shake her assumptions, her mind churning with quiet disapproval, wondering just how long this family planned to linger in a place she felt was far above their status. Little did she know, the Harrises were here for something that would soon dismantle all her preconceptions and challenge everything she thought she knew about the people who belonged, and those she thought didn't. As the Harris family made their way through the opulent lobby of the Grand Oaks Hotel, the lavish surroundings seemed to pull a silent, almost palpable judgment from every corner. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm, golden light that glinted off polished marble floors and gilded decor. Every inch of the hotel spoke of luxury, and every detail was meticulously curated to create an atmosphere of exclusivity. It was a place that whispered, "You belong here, if you fit in." And the looks cast toward the Harris family made it painfully clear that they, in the eyes of some, did not. Tessa, still stationed at the reception desk, stole quick glances as the family moved through the lobby, her expression one of faint bemusement. She had made her feelings obvious, yet the family hadn't seemed rattled or offended. Mrs. Harris, especially, walked with a steady confidence, an air of purpose that made it clear they were not here by accident. She held her head high, her gaze resolute, as though each step toward their destination only solidified her determination. Mr. Harris walked beside her, his presence calm but alert, while their young daughter clung to her mother's hand, looking around with wide, curious eyes, innocent yet observant. The other guests noticed too, casting sidelong glances as they murmured among themselves. Some tried to mask their stares behind polite smiles, while others didn't bother to hide their surprise, or even disdain. Tessa, watching from a distance, could almost hear the silent chorus of disapproval. It was as if the grand, elegant space itself resisted their presence, echoing the unspoken question lingering in the air. Why are they here? Unfazed, Mrs. Harris continued forward, a faint smile on her lips, projecting a sense of calm that seemed to permeate through her family. She knew what they were here for, and nothing in this place was going to shake her resolve. With every stride, her purpose seemed to strengthen, as if she were channeling all the silent judgment around her into a force of resilience. The glances from strangers, the raised eyebrows, the subtle but unmistakable looks from staff members, they all washed over her like water off a stone. When they reached the elevators, Mr. Harris pressed the button, and as they waited, a well-dressed couple nearby whispered to each other, not quite as discreetly as they might have thought. Mrs. Harris heard fragments of their conversation, the tones carrying a mixture of surprise and condescension. But instead of reacting, she kept her focus straight ahead, her expression serene. This wasn't the first time she'd faced this sort of treatment, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. Today, however, was different. She and her family had come to the Grand Oaks with purpose, and whatever doubts or prejudice surrounded them would not deter her. As they stepped into the elevator, Tessa watched from her post at the front desk, her expression unreadable, but her thoughts far from neutral. She wondered just how long this family planned to stay, if they understood that places like this had unspoken codes of conduct, subtle rules about who fit and who didn't. To her, they seemed wildly out of place, and a part of her couldn't shake the idea that their presence was almost intrusive, a disruption to the carefully controlled elegance she so valued in the hotel. Meanwhile, the Harrises, now out of sight of the scrutinizing Lottie, shared a quiet moment. Mr. Harris leaned slightly toward his wife, whispering, "Everything okay?" She gave him a reassuring smile and nodded. "Let them stare," she murmured back. "They'll understand soon enough why we're here." The exchange was brief, but it was all the reassurance they needed. Their daughter, picking up on her parents' quiet confidence, squeezed her mother's hand and smiled up at her, the faintest hint of excitement in her eyes. The family reached their room, a spacious suite that overlooked the city's skyline, its luxurious amenities and panoramic windows signaling the opulence of the Grand Oaks. As they settled in, the weight of the hotel's atmosphere seemed to lift, replaced by a growing sense of anticipation. They were here for more than just a stay. They were here to make a statement. Each of them knew that what they had planned would likely come as a shock, and perhaps even a disruption to the status quo of the hotel, but it was a disruption they were ready for. Hours later, they made their way back downstairs for dinner. The hotel's grand dining hall was just as elaborate as the lobby, filled with patrons dressed in evening attire, glistening chandeliers above, and candlelit tables creating an air of exclusivity. When the Harrises entered, conversations paused briefly, and once again, those nearby took notice. This time, however, the family seemed even more resolute. Mrs. Harris's calm smile remained, her posture tall and assured. They walked to their reserved table, a prime spot that caught the attention of many, including Tessa, who happened to be passing by. As the family dined, they felt the weight of the room's attention on them. They endured more subtle glances, the occasional stare, and even a few less than polite exchanges from nearby guests, who seemed puzzled by their presence. The waitstaff, visibly torn between professionalism and their own biases, offered service that was, while not overtly rude, noticeably lacking in warmth. Yet, the Harrises remained gracious, treating each server with respect and responding to each slight with calm dignity. Tessa, observing from a distance, found herself growing curious despite her initial judgments. She couldn't ignore the confidence with which the Harrises conducted themselves, the quiet strength they seemed to embody. She noticed the way they held their heads high, the way Mrs. Harris's gaze never wavered, as though she were aware of every silent judgment around her, but had already chosen not to be affected by it. Each subtle dismissal seemed only to add to the family's composure, as if they were fueled by the very challenges placed in their path. Though Tessa didn't know it yet, each look of disapproval, each whisper, and every act of subtle disrespect was only setting the stage for a moment that would soon turn everything upside down. The Harrises had come to the Grand Oaks for a reason, and while Tessa and many of the guests assumed they didn't belong, they were about to learn just how wrong they had been. With each shared glance, each supportive touch, and each quiet smile, the Harrises were preparing for a moment that would not only change their own experience at the hotel, but would echo through its halls in a way no one would soon forget. The atmosphere in the Grand Oaks Hotel lobby was as polished and curated as ever, a space designed to exude elegance and command respect. The day had moved slowly, the usual hum of routine blending with the quiet murmurs of guests passing through. Tessa, stationed at her post behind the reception desk, had gone about her duties with an air of satisfaction. The Harris family, though still on her mind, was now a distant thought. She had made her judgments, felt assured in her assumptions, and returned to the steady flow of her day. Little did she know, everything was about to shift. Around mid-afternoon, an unexpected scene began to unfold. The lobby grew unusually quiet as footsteps echoed from the back hallways, signaling the arrival of someone of importance. Heads began to turn as the hotel's manager, a man known for his no-nonsense demeanor and impeccable standards, entered the lobby. His presence always commanded attention, and today he seemed particularly focused, moving with a purpose that caught even Tessa's attention. She watched as he crossed the lobby, his gaze locked onto a familiar figure. The Harrises had returned to the lobby, standing near the entrance with a composed and resolute air. Tessa couldn't help but feel a spark of curiosity. Why would the manager go out of his way to meet this family? She tried to dismiss it, but as the manager approached the Harrises with a warm, almost deferential smile, something didn't sit right with her. There was a familiarity between them, an ease that felt out of place in her carefully constructed view of how things were supposed to be at the Grand Oaks. The realization crept in slowly, a gnawing sense that she had missed something vital about this family she judged so quickly. As the manager greeted the Harrises, his voice carried just enough for Tessa to overhear fragments of the conversation. "Mr. and Mrs. Harris, it's an honor to have you here with us today," he said, his tone filled with genuine warmth and respect. Tessa's confusion deepened. She strained to hear more, and as she watched the exchange, she noticed subtle shifts in the body language of other hotel staff nearby. Each of them seemed more attentive, more reverent, as though they were in the presence of someone important. The disconnect between what she had assumed about the Harrises and the respect they were being shown by her manager made her uneasy. Then, in a single moment, everything changed. The manager turned slightly, his eyes landing on Tessa with a sharpness that caught her off guard. With a nod, he beckoned her over. Her pulse quickened as she approached, her mind racing to understand what was happening. She came to a halt beside the manager, her face a mix of confusion and reluctant curiosity. The manager's voice was calm but carried an unmistakable authority. "Tessa, I'd like to introduce you to the Harrises," he said, pausing for a beat that seemed to stretch on forever. He turned back to the family, his expression proud as he continued. "The Harrises are the new majority stakeholders of the Grand Oaks Hotel." The words hung in the air, each one landing with the weight of a revelation. Tessa's eyes widened, the color draining from her face as realization struck her like a tidal wave. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came. In that moment, every judgment she had made, every assumption, every dismissive glance, it all crashed down around her. The family she had treated with such casual disdain, the people she had pegged as out of place from the moment they walked in, were not just guests. They were her new bosses. They owned the place she held in such high regard, the very establishment where she had felt so assured in her sense of superiority. Mr. Harris met her gaze, his expression a mixture of kindness and something more, a quiet knowing that seemed to see right through her. "Thank you for making us feel welcomed, Tessa," he said, his tone measured, almost gentle, but with an edge that hinted at the underlying tension of the day's events. Mrs. Harris stood beside him, her posture graceful and composed, her face a mirror of calm poise. Their daughter looked up at Tessa, her young eyes full of innocence and curiosity, unaware of the turmoil now swirling within the receptionist. Tessa felt a wave of embarrassment flood over her cheeks flushing as she struggled to process the enormity of her mistake. She managed a weak, stammered response, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't realize," she mumbled, unable to meet Mr. Harris's gaze. Mrs. Harris, observing Tessa's discomfort, offered a small, sympathetic smile. "We understand that appearances can be misleading," she said softly, her words laced with a subtle yet unmistakable rebuke. "It's easy to make assumptions, but it's a lesson in humility to remember that everyone has a story, and not all stories are visible on the surface." The manager, sensing the tension, gently placed a hand on Tessa's shoulder, a silent reminder of the standards he expected in his staff. But it was Mr. Harris's words that stayed with her, striking deeper than any reprimand could. "We hope," he began, his voice steady, "that our experience here can help bring some changes to the guest experience. It's important to us that everyone feels valued, regardless of who they are or where they come from." With that, the Harrises turned, their presence in the lobby now a symbol of quiet authority. As they walked away, Tessa felt as though the ground beneath her had shifted irrevocably. The very people she had viewed with indifference, even disdain, had now become the faces of her future in the hotel. Her position, her sense of security in the way things had always been, all of it now felt uncertain, unsteady. The experience was a profound blow to her pride, a moment of reckoning that left her reeling. In the days that followed, word spread quickly among the staff and regular guests about the Harrises' ownership of the hotel. Their story became a quiet yet powerful reminder of the dangers of assumptions and the importance of humility. Tessa, now facing the consequences of her actions, found herself under new scrutiny, her behavior observed not only by her peers, but by the Harrises themselves. The family's quiet presence became a force for change within the hotel, reshaping its culture from the inside out. As for Tessa, the lesson lingered, a daily reminder each time she stepped into the lobby, each time she interacted with a guest. She carried the weight of her mistake, striving to mend what could be mended and to approach her work with a new perspective. The Harrises had offered her a gift, a second chance to see people for who they truly were, beyond appearances and assumptions. And as she moved forward, she did so with a newfound humility, a silent resolve to honor the lessons she had learned from the family she had so profoundly underestimated. The revelation of the Harrises as the new majority stakeholders swept through the Grand Oaks Hotel like wildfire, leaving an indelible mark on everyone who had witnessed Tessa's behavior, and on Tessa herself. As the manager stood by, apologizing profusely to the Harrises for the treatment they had endured, Tessa felt herself shrink under the weight of her mistakes. Her face burned with embarrassment, and her hands trembled as she stood in silence, realizing just how profoundly she had misjudged them. The manager, his voice filled with remorse and urgency, spoke sincerely to Mr. and Mrs. Harris. "I can't begin to express how deeply sorry I am," he said, glancing at Tessa as he continued. "This behavior is absolutely unacceptable at the Grand Oaks. Please know that this is not a reflection of our values, and we will take immediate steps to ensure it never happens again." Mr. Harris nodded, accepting the apology with a calm that only underscored the dignity with which he had carried himself all along. "Thank you for your words," he replied. "But as new owners, my wife and I would like to ensure that respect and hospitality are at the forefront of this establishment's reputation. We want to create an environment where everyone feels welcomed and valued, regardless of who they are." With that, the manager promised to address the matter formally, assuring the Harrises that all staff would undergo a renewed training program focused on diversity, inclusion, and hospitality. Tessa could feel eyes on her from across the lobby. Her colleagues, other guests, perhaps even those who had silently judged the family along with her. The looks burned, each one a reminder of how easily she had let her assumptions cloud her judgment. The Harrises had left an undeniable impact on the hotel. Within days, news of the ownership change spread not just to the staff, but to frequent guests and business partners who had once treated the family with the same indifference that Tessa had shown. Whispers of the incident circulated through the halls, gaining momentum until even the smallest details of Tessa's initial interactions with the Harrises became widely known. Employees began to talk about the family with a newfound respect, recognizing that they had not only persevered through unwarranted judgment, but had done so with grace and restraint. The staff now looked upon Mr. and Mrs. Harris as examples of quiet strength and dignity, qualities that Tessa had missed entirely in her haste to judge. For Tessa, life at the Grand Oaks took on a different tone. Every day, she was reminded of her actions, her past mistakes woven into the fabric of her interactions with both guests and colleagues. Her manager put her on a temporary probation, explaining that it was essential for her to understand the importance of respect and impartiality in her role. This probation was not just a symbolic gesture. Tessa found herself tasked with mandatory training sessions, workshops on customer service, and personal mentorship from her manager, who hoped she would learn from her mistakes and become a better team member. But more than the structured lessons, it was the small, everyday reminders that left a lasting impression on Tessa. She began to see herself as others did, feeling the weight of every skeptical glance and cold shoulder, knowing that she had lost the respect of her peers. Some of the other employees distanced themselves from her, hesitant to be associated with someone who had publicly misjudged the very owners of the hotel. It was a humbling experience, one that forced her to confront the parts of herself she had ignored or justified for far too long. Meanwhile, the Harrises quickly became figures of admiration within the Grand Oaks. Unlike other owners who might have hidden behind closed doors or left the management to the staff, they took an active role in overseeing the hotel's daily operations. Mr. Harris could often be seen greeting guests personally, his presence calm yet commanding, a reassuring sight to newcomers and regulars alike. Mrs. Harris spent time with each department, learning from the employees, understanding their roles, and listening to their experiences. She encouraged everyone to treat guests with the warmth and respect she had once been denied, turning her own experience into a powerful lesson for the staff. The couple's leadership style brought about a subtle but noticeable transformation within the hotel. Employees felt more empowered and appreciated, knowing that the Harrises genuinely valued their input. Guests, too, began to sense a shift. The warmth and welcome they received seemed more sincere, the attention to detail more personal. The Grand Oaks Hotel, once known for its exclusivity and unapproachable luxury, gradually became a place where people felt welcomed and included, regardless of their background. For Tessa, each shift became a challenge to uphold the new values that the Harrises embodied. Her initial discomfort and shame slowly transformed into a determination to make amends, though she knew it would take time to regain the trust she had lost. She started taking the Harrises' lessons to heart, going out of her way to greet each guest with genuine warmth and respect, making an effort to see beyond appearances. She began to understand the impact of her role, realizing that her attitude set the tone for each guest's experience. It was humbling work, but she took it seriously, knowing that her actions were now under scrutiny. One day, Mrs. Harris passed by the reception desk, her presence calm and graceful as always. She stopped for a moment, looking at Tessa with a soft, unreadable expression. "How are you finding the new training sessions?" she asked, her tone neutral yet supportive. Tessa swallowed, feeling a mixture of gratitude and remorse. "They're insightful," she replied, her voice sincere. "I'm learning a lot, and I want to do better. Thank you for giving me the chance to grow." Mrs. Harris nodded, her eyes reflecting a quiet understanding. "Everyone deserves the chance to learn, Tessa. It's not the mistakes we make that define us, but how we choose to grow from them. I hope you'll remember that." Those words stayed with Tessa, resonating deeply as she continued her journey of self-improvement. She had learned a hard lesson about humility, one that would follow her in every interaction, every new face she encountered at the Grand Oaks. The judgment she had once so easily cast on the Harrises now served as a daily reminder of the importance of compassion, open-mindedness, and the power of second chances. The Harrises, meanwhile, had firmly established themselves as beloved figures within the hotel. Staff members spoke of them with respect and admiration, and frequent guests came to recognize them as the heart of the Grand Oaks. The family's presence was a source of pride for the employees, a testament to the values that now defined the hotel's culture. They had turned a moment of unfair judgment into an opportunity for growth and transformation, not just for themselves, but for everyone who crossed paths with them. As Tessa continued in her role, she often found herself reflecting on the journey she had taken, from judgment to humility, from dismissal to respect. She knew that she would carry the lessons learned from the Harrises with her long after her days at the Grand Oaks. Their quiet strength, their grace under pressure, and their unwavering sense of dignity had shown her a path to become not just a better employee, but a better person. In the end, the Harrises had not only reclaimed their dignity, but had left an indelible mark on the Grand Oaks Hotel, a place that now stood as a beacon of inclusivity and respect, a place where all guests, regardless of appearance or background, could feel at home. And Tessa, once the face of the hotel's indifference, had become one of its strongest advocates for change, her journey of redemption a testament to the power of humility and the lasting impact of kindness. As the days turned to weeks, the Grand Oaks Hotel continued to operate with its familiar elegance, but something fundamental had shifted within its walls. The Harrises' presence lingered in every corner, their influence woven into the fabric of the hotel's culture in ways both seen and unseen. The staff, guests, and even Tessa herself could feel it, a renewed sense of warmth, respect, and inclusivity that transformed the experience of all who entered. The judgment that had once clouded this place, the assumptions that had tarnished its reputation, now served as reminders of a powerful lesson, that true strength and dignity often reveal themselves in the quietest of ways. The Harrises had entered the hotel without fanfare, dressed as any family might be, with nothing more than their confidence and a belief that they, too, belonged. They had walked into a world that judged by appearances, a place where the rules of exclusivity were often upheld through subtle dismissals and silent evaluations. Yet, through their resilience and poise, they had left an impact more profound than any grand entrance could have. In simply being themselves, they had challenged the very culture of the Grand Oaks, showing that respect and value should not be measured by outward appearances, but by the content of character and the quality of one's actions. It wasn't just the staff who changed. Guests began to notice the difference too. There was a warmth in the way they were greeted, a sincerity that hadn't been there before. Regular guests who had once experienced the cold efficiency of luxury hospitality now found themselves welcomed with genuine smiles and kind words. The hotel's atmosphere shifted from one of detached refinement to one of thoughtful elegance, where the dignity of every person was respected. It was no longer just a place for those who fit the mold, but a place where every guest could feel they belonged. The Harrises' journey had taught everyone at the Grand Oaks a lesson in humility. Tessa, once a symbol of the hotel's exclusivity, now embodied the change they had brought. Her own transformation was a testament to the impact that one family could have on an entire institution. Through her initial mistakes and eventual growth, she came to understand that true hospitality is not about rigid standards, but about making people feel seen, valued, and respected. Each guest became an opportunity to practice this newfound humility, and each interaction, a chance to honor the legacy of the Harrises. Reflecting on her journey, Tessa would often think back to that pivotal moment when she had learned who the Harrises really were. The shock of discovering their identity had shaken her, but it was the grace with which they had responded that left the deepest mark. They had shown her, through quiet resilience, the power of kindness and the strength that comes from choosing dignity over retaliation. They had every right to demand retribution, to assert their authority in ways that might have humiliated her, but they hadn't. Instead, they had treated her with a level of respect she hadn't afforded them, offering her a chance to change rather than condemning her for her mistakes. In life, the most powerful people are often those who need no loud declarations, who enter spaces without the need to prove themselves, because their strength lies within. They walk with quiet confidence, a resilience that comes not from a desire for recognition, but from a place of inner peace and self-respect. The Harrises were just such people. Their calm determination, their refusal to be shaken by judgment or prejudice, and their commitment to integrity became a silent force that reshaped the Grand Oaks from the inside out. Their legacy was felt not only in the improved treatment of guests, but in the way employees related to one another. There was a newfound sense of camaraderie among the staff, a shared understanding that every role, from concierge to cleaning staff, deserved equal respect. The hierarchy that had once divided them seemed less rigid, replaced by a collective spirit of kindness and mutual support. The Harrises had reminded them all that no one was above or below another, that everyone had a right to be treated with respect, no matter their position or background. For Tessa, the impact of the Harrises went beyond her professional life. Their lesson in humility extended to her personal beliefs. challenging her assumptions and biases in ways she had never anticipated. She found herself more aware of her own judgments, more cautious before assuming she knew someone's story based on a glance. This lesson, she realized, would serve her far beyond the walls of the Grand Oaks, shaping her interactions with friends, strangers, and even family. She began to understand that every person she encountered carried a story, a history unseen, and that her role was not to judge, but to welcome, to listen, and to respect. As the hotel continued to flourish under the Harrises' ownership, their story became something of a legend within its walls. New employees heard whispers of the family that had changed everything, of the powerful lesson they had taught without raising their voices or making grand demands. The story was passed down, a reminder of the values that now define the Grand Oaks, and even the guests, unaware of the full details, could sense the difference, feeling the hotel's embrace in a way that went beyond luxury and touched the heart of true hospitality. In the end, the Harrises had done more than assume ownership of a prestigious hotel. They had redefined what it meant to belong in a place like the Grand Oaks. Through their journey, they reminded everyone that respect isn't something that should be granted only to those who look the part or fit an arbitrary mold. True respect is earned by those who live with integrity, who treat others with dignity, and who choose kindness, even in the face of judgment. They had proven that sometimes the most influential changes come not from loud reforms, but from quiet strength, from the courage to be oneself in the face of prejudice. As Tessa looked back on her journey and the changes that followed, she understood that the Harrises had given her more than just a lesson in humility. They had given her a second chance, a path to redemption, and the opportunity to grow into a person she could be proud of. She carried their legacy with her, knowing that every interaction, every small act of kindness, was a way of honoring the family that had taught her the meaning of true respect. The Harrises had left a mark not only on Tessa and the Grand Oaks, but on every person who walked through its doors, a mark that would endure long after they had gone. Their story became a part of the hotel's spirit, a legacy that reminded everyone who heard it of the simple, powerful truth that respect isn't just given to those who look the part, but earned by those who truly deserve it. And in the quiet moments, in the pauses between duties and responsibilities, the staff of the Grand Oaks would remember the family who had shown them that real power lies not in appearances, but in character, resilience, and the unwavering belief in the dignity of every person. The Grand Oaks Hotel stood as a testament to this truth, a place where everyone, regardless of their background, was treated with the respect they deserved, a legacy that would inspire all who came after to look beyond appearances and recognize the strength and worth within.